Hey there, how's it going? Welcome back to QEDTalks, and I've got another awesome nerdlet here to speak with and chat with. We have Jason, aka Shadomain, one of the lead writers, owners, creators, what have you, of Shadomain.com, which the links will be in the doobly-doo below. If you've watched the Gamer Mom Luna channel, you may recognize the site. We've talked about it before, like GM tips, blogs, interviews, all sorts of pretty awesome RPG stuff. I've actually really been enjoying sort of combing through it the past while, so it actually is really worth checking it out. So you're going to want to check that out. Hello, Jason. How's it going?
Hello, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. Been a busy week, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So we'll go through the usual, the format, the way we usually do, and it's less of an interview and more of just a chit chat. Generally, we go over time, and I have to edit it down afterwards. That's just how gamers be, yo.
Yep.
But we go through some basic baseline questions just to see how you are compared to some of the other people that we've talked to. And, we get some deets about you, get to learn a little bit about you. And then at the end, we'll try to answer some questions together. I've got a whole bunch of community questions. I haven't really thought about them myself. So we get to actually sit down and sort of impromptu be like, hey, how do each of our individual styles deal with this sort of situation? And
that's good.
It'd be pretty fun. So let's start with a little bit about you. Obviously, this is an RPG-centric channel, as is a lot of your stuff. How and when did you first get into the hobby, and did you have any preconceived notions about RPGs before you started?
No. So I started with the red box for nerds, the Moldvay edition of Basic D&D, in 1981. I didn't know what it was. I had read about it in a Scholastic magazine called Dynamite that was distributed through schools where I lived. And there was an article on Dungeons and Dragons. Had no idea what it was, but I was immediately hooked. So I ran and got the red book and could not figure it out. But I did find out later that one of my friends had played it with some older kids at summer camp and knew a little bit about the game. So he was my first DM. But we soon enough figured that he was used to playing AD&D, and this was something more limited. So we ditched the red book and expert set and moved on to AD&D. And yeah, from then on, we were hooked. I think, although I did play, so I played through, the middle school, high school, college. And I actually gave it up for 25 years, maybe.
Wow.
And I only got back into it with 5e.
Okay.
So then I had to relearn everything and the history of it too. Like, this 4th edition thing was really something. And then, but then I got back into 5e. Fortunately, by now there was all kinds of live play, so I could catch up pretty quickly. And I was just dove back into it. I was like, why did I ever give this up? This is cool. And most of the time is spent on the early years and lately. I am pretty much a forever GM, and that's mostly by choice. It's what I like to do. So.
Yeah, I totally hear that. The GM seat's my favorite seat as well.
Yeah. And then the last few years I've spent saying, boy, I wonder what else is out there, and playing for a Cypher system and all the Money Cook games, and then branching out recently to, Blades in the Dark and other systems like that. So
it's pretty awesome. I'm not as familiar with Blades in the Dark myself. I haven't really looked at that one, but I've played like a billion other systems at this point. Myself. Yeah, no, it was, because you and I connected originally on the Cypher Unlimited community, right? Yeah.
Yes. I'm wearing this shirt.
Oh, you're even wearing the shirt. Represent! I like it. Cypher Unlimited is also a link I tend to put in a lot of my descriptions and a doobly-doo below for anyone watching, because they're an amazing community. I guess, like, impromptu shout out for them, just because they're beyond nice. They're so supportive and so awesome. Yeah,
and there's, to not get into an ad here, but they have almost 4,000 people on their Discord, and you will not find a single rude, arrogant, mean person there. I don't know how they do it, but if you're on Twitter in the TTRPG space, you hear people complaining about how toxic it is.
Yeah,
it's just like that's a wonderland that's immune to that kind of thing. So it's pretty cool.
I've had to deal with some of the toxicity in my own videos recently, and
yes,
I've lived in a very, I want to say, a fairly nice bubble up until recent years. Like, everyone in my region's just like, everyone's super open. Doesn't matter, like, we don't care what you are or who you are or what you believe or anything like that at the table. If you're pretending to be a fantasy elf or dwarf, who cares? Right. So, but yeah, since especially with the big pandemic panini that went on when we all kind of got shoved online more and more and more, I find that we've had to deal with the specials coming out of their own individual closets a lot more. It's been eye-opening for me, because I've never had to deal with that, nor has a lot of the people in my local community. It's been a lot. Yeah. No, this is really interesting. How did you, so you got back into it? I have heard a lot of people that have taken a break over time, especially in like their adult years and whatnot. Because I mean, yeah, after college, you get into adulting, and you're like, all right, I got to do shit now. But I know a lot of people, as they grow, I do see a lot of people getting back into it. I myself, thankfully, I had some years where it was kind of dry spells, but I never actually like stopped.
Yep.
Just got busy. But what brought you back into it specifically? Was there like a certain group that's like, hey, like, you want to join back up? Or was there like, did you see maybe like Critical Role popping up, or what was it that sort of like was like, hey, I should check this out again?
Yeah, I actually didn't know anything about D&D. I mean, I knew it still existed, and I know TSR had been bought out long ago by WotC, but I didn't know anything about it. The rise of 5e and Critical Role and all that. It was a friend of mine, my friend Aaron, who had his son was interested. Mm-hmm. So one day he calls me up and said, do you know anything about Dungeons and Dragons? And I'm like, kind of, sort of, maybe not really. So he basically convinced me to learn the basic rule book, and so I could DM for his son. He was like 10 years old. Mm. So I went out and got the Player's Handbook and DM's Guide, Monster Manual, and read through it. And then it was like, oh yeah, I love this stuff. That's right. Now I remember. And I don't think his son still plays, but and Aaron doesn't play, but that was enough to get me back into it. And yeah, ever since then it's been like, where else can I play? And yeah, then at that point where I was trying to learn, because I basically jumped from 2E to 5E. So
yeah, that's a big jump.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, reading the rules is not going to do it all. Unfortunately, there was Critical Role and Dimension 20 and a few and others that I sort of like listened to in the background while I was working, like a podcast, mm-hmm. and got most of the rules.
Yeah, it's a good way to update. The game has changed dramatically over time. Like my first thing was the red box set, but I didn't really play it that much. For the most part, AD&D second edition was my intro to RPGs. Yeah. I'm also glad that you've branched out over time, other systems, because like you kind of got out of it at the time that I would say D&D was, I kind of want to say, dying, because I've mentioned in my other videos, you go to conventions and you mention, oh, I'm still just playing D&D, and everyone's like, really?
Yeah, so the time I left, not that this is why, it's just the way it worked out. The time I left would have been around the time that like Vampire the Masquerade was coming up. and that kind of groundswell very much like dampened D&D. Like, you still play that? So yeah.
Yeah, we started seeing some heavy hitters like Cyberpunk, Shadowrun, Rifts, of course, took its own niche crowd out and stuff like that. And then, yeah, the World of Darkness stuff. Like I went through that phase. Like my group went through that phase where we delved into World of Darkness, all of those like vampire and mage and stuff. It was interesting. But yeah, so that was at a time when we branched out a lot. So like, it's not like nowadays where everyone's like, you know, the big WotC Hasbro corporation of making D&D is like, this is the default. We didn't have that back in the day. There was no default, even if D&D was still kind of the bigger name, because people played all sorts of stuff.
In the 90s that was very much true. In the early 80s, D&D was the default, but not in the marketing way that it is today. It was just, that was the big groundswell. AD&D was the game, but basically much like today, like everybody started. We tried a lot of things back then. We tried the other TSRs, the Gamma World and Boot Hill, things like that. I even had like the early editions of Toon, the Steve Jackson game.
Oh.
But for whatever, I don't remember them sticking. I remember like trying a couple of sessions of, Traveler, that was the other one for sci-fi. But I remember trying them out, and I don't remember why we weren't into them, but we always came back to AD&D.
Yeah, my groups are very much the same for the most part, at least as far as D&D additions were concerned. 3.0 came out, we're like, hey, this is neat. We tried it, and then we went back to second edition.
Yeah.
3.5 came out, and we're like, hey, new tools, this is neat. And then we went back to second edition. And then fourth edition, we're like, hey, this came out, and this is not neat. And then we went back to second edition.
Yeah.
And then,
although
eventually fifth edition.
In the 80s, it was very different, that there were these other products. Try, there were some weird ones, Gangbusters and Top Secret and stuff like that.
Oh, I love.
They were all basically like reflavored D&D. And people would argue about that. There was like Middle Earth role playing and stuff like that. But basically, and Villains and Vigilantes and Champions were out then. But they weren't. It wasn't a broad palette like there is today. Like today, the independent games are really different. If you if you come from D&D and you jump into Blades in the Dark or Fate or something like that,
Dread
or any Cypher system game, that's a completely different mindset where it's much a bigger stretch than back in the day when we tried Gamma World. It wasn't that big a deal,
Yeah, I found the same thing going from like the 90s into even like the odds, like the 2000s. Everything was very much just like, this is how a role-playing game works. But then something shifted, and like you mentioned, Fate. Like, I've had to make entire videos not on how the mechanics work, but how to think differently just so you could play the game.
Yes.
Because
we didn't, there's a lot of impressions out there about how it was back in AD&D. But we did a lot of groups, and some of it is because we were teenagers. A lot of groups had that DM versus player mentality, right? But whether you did or didn't, the emphasis on storytelling wasn't really there. We weren't, you made out your character, and maybe you'd have likes and dislikes or fears or something like that. But it was basically 1 or 2 words. You weren't creating a character like you are today. Like a lot of my players in today's games will create characters that aren't tactically the best options because it doesn't fit their story. They'll come up with the story first and then figure out how the character how the rules work around that story. And that's something that's really what's kept me into it since I've been back is, wait a minute, this is completely different. It's really creative in a way that the other games, the early days, probably weren't as creative.
Yeah, and it all obviously it all comes down to the groups and their different ideologies and stuff.
Yes.
Dealt with them and stuff. But yeah, no, there has been, I think, in general, for the majority of the populace, there has been a pretty big shift, a pretty big change.
Right.
Like even in my I don't really run D&D anymore myself. I prefer usually games like Cypher or Fate or something. Yep. But I am in a D&D game, and I brought in like a barbarian wizard. It doesn't work at all, but it goes with the character I created. Even though it doesn't really technically mesh with it, but it doesn't matter because that's not why we're playing it. Whereas I think back to when I started my first DM, the first 3 years that I ever played RPGs. If your character lived through the session, you must have done something, like bribed him or something.
Right.
One guy lost 7 characters in one session. Like that was the type of game that guy ran. And it was brutal. But it was a very, very different style. Especially back then compared to what we have today. Yeah,
I should say that I don't think of it so much as a paradigm shift as I think of an expansion in the ways to play the game. Mm-hmm. That not everybody, I always tell players, especially when I find I'm putting together a group of online where I may not know any of these players, that we may not be right for each other, right? I may not be the right GM for you. You might not be the right player for me, but that doesn't mean either of us are doing it wrong.
Yeah.
I still believe that there is a table for everybody. And so I'm not saying that there are no tactically min-maxing players out there. And there are still GM versus player scenarios out there too. Mm-hmm. That's all fine. It's just not how I prefer to play the game now. So I think it's more, it's a wider, variety of ways to play the game. I think it's still fine to play that way if that's why you're into the game. If that's what you like, then just find another 4, 5, 6 players who feel the same way and go for it.
And I find you don't even have to stick with the one style as well. For our groups, we do tend to be pretty RP heavy. Like in our Windermere fantasy online game that we're doing, which has a bit of more combat. But the one guy beat a boss encounter by just talking about canoes until the thing got basically bored and wandered away. It ended up being a social encounter in the end.
That's great.
On the same note, we have times when maybe we're missing a player or two, or the GM can't come out, and we just want to chuck some dice and kill some shit. And we've got something we invented called Dungeon Slug, where that's what it is. It's a roguelike. There's a lot of randomness to it. You never know what's going to happen. There's basically no actual RP. You're just chucking dice. You're just killing shit. And you're seeing if you die. And we do both because sometimes that's just what we want to do, and it's nice to be able to switch it up. Right.
It's funny as looking back at it. I see this a lot on Twitter. Mostly from people 5e players who joined the game at that point. And I'll see either a question to players or DMs. Have you ever had a character die? And I don't understand, because what you were saying, I don't even understand that. So when we very first started playing, back when I said I didn't really understand it. So my friend Joe was the DM because he was the only one who knew what was going on. It was just me and my brother. So we would go into, Joe said he had a dungeon. We would make up 3 characters or 5 characters and just play them all. We must have played half a dozen times before I had a single character live. They were always TPKs.
I think that's one of the many reasons I actually like being in the GM seat more, is I have a little bit of what I kind of say is character ADD, where I have so many ideas for characters that I want to play, and as a player, I don't get to cycle through them without sort of being disruptive because they die. But as the GM, I do. I think it's one of the many reasons that I like to be in that seat myself. So what style of, so now that you've branched out more, you've experienced other genres, other games and stuff like that, what style of games do you prefer, as far as maybe genres, or the whether it's narrative versus crunchy, serious versus funny? What kind of styles do you prefer out of an RPG?
So I guess from a GM perspective, I am very much looking for a collaborative game. And I've sort of pushed this even into what you might consider less collaborative systems like Pathfinder 5e kind of things. That because I've been playing in games like Blades and Cypher and stuff like that, I'm looking for my players to not just create a character with a 5-page backstory, but to help me create I do the very much the Sly Flourish minimal prep method, right? The lazy dungeon master.
Yeah.
And to even with world building, if I start a new campaign, I may only have one city created and a couple of villages out. And when a player comes to me and says, well, but my elf comes from a musical village where everybody sings instead of talking, and they live in tree houses. I'm like, okay, what's the name of your village? And then we put it on the map. I just keep, asking them to contribute. And that's the kind of game I try to run. And there's a technique here that sometimes you'll get the 5-page backstory, and that's great because there everything's done for you, right? You just got to work it into your system. Sometimes you'll get the quieter player who's just like, yeah, I'm a rogue, and oh, okay, I use a pink dagger instead of a gold dagger, and that's all they have. You don't want to force those people to create the 5-page backstory. Mm-hmm. So what I found is you can. What the best way to deal with that is as you go along, prompt them. Like, I'll just say, okay, well, here's 5 cities in this country. What city did you come from? Okay, whatever. Now I just write that down. When we get to that city, I'll say, well, okay, what kind of, what part of town did you come from? Are your relatives still here? And you just prompt them a little bit at a time, and before you know it, they've rounded out their character. So I'm trying to, it's not an exact answer to what you asked, but
that's fine.
I'm trying to get the players to not just make their character, but help me build a world in some cases. As far as let's see, what kind of games? Okay, so I have to admit, I ran 5e for a few years before I jumped into Cypher, and really what got me into Cypher was not just, oh, this is rules light and this is story focused. It was the Cypher system itself being genre independent, because I had these weird ideas, most of them dealing with modern times, like something that happened next door, and except it was really crazy. So I used it to do just crazy things because of that. So I do run a lot of that. So I run fantasy because that's what people want. But I run a lot of one-shots that are very weird. Take place in the 1950s, and they involve space aliens and gangsters and rock and roll hoodlums. Just anything odd like that. I've done a little bit of sci-fi as far as genres. I haven't been very successful at it. Mm-hmm. Might be just luck. And then Blades, I'm running now with the system that's built into it. So that's sort of a steampunk haunted city kind of scenario. I don't know. What did I miss of your question? What did I gloss over?
No, I think you kind of we wandered through it at one point. I think we kind of got it. Yeah, really. I mean, you like that the narrative, like the group is deciding, you're putting it together, and it sounds like you just kind of go with the flow, whatever is kind of tickling your fancy at that time. Yeah, which I totally get. I've run some weird ass shit in the past. Like we just had one of the live stream games we just finished was a Kuno High School Spell Club, where I took kids on brooms, which is normally like Harry Potter-esque, and I'm like, all right, screw that. It's in a Japanese high school, and after the 3rd episode, suddenly there was a zombie apocalypse, and they're like, what the and yeah, we switch it up. Or in Fate. Right. In Fate, I'm like, all right, everyone's roommates. I'm like, and they're like, okay, well, what can we play? And I'm like, whatever you want. And we had like a xenomorph and a werewolf and an accountant named Tim. Like these universal RPGs really just let you branch out and be creative and do things. And it's not like they're a new concept. I mean, GURPS has existed for a very long time now. And I would say that's one of the earliest universal RPGs I can think of.
Yep.
But it still needed a lot of support.
I guess if I had to classify it, my campaigns tend to be like, maybe not overly serious, but they're not humorous. Mm-hmm. But my one-shots are really out there. Like I've got, I think the first Cypher one-shot I wrote was, it's based on, inspired by the Clue board game. So you actually role play out a murder mystery.
That's like really cool.
Colonel Mustard or something. And then, that wasn't weird enough. So then I wrote one where you play a character from Gilligan's Island, but you're marooned on the old 70s cartoon Land of the Lost. So you have to escape the island, but instead of it being Gilligan's Island, you're being chased by like lizard people and dinosaurs, and
that's what I love.
Yeah, so that's games. The kind of weird, funny stuff I write, but that's typically one-shots.
And people really, when you put them in, I wouldn't even say a silly scenario, just an oddball scenario, because they could have taken that semi-seriously. People get, I find they get more creative.
Right. So the Gilligan's Island one is on drive-through, and it's written so you can run it in 2 modes. So it says in the intro, ask your players how you want to play this. If they want to play it for laughs, like at the end of every encounter, it says like not horror mode, but like dark mode, where if you're playing this serious, by the way, this can happen too. So you could play it either way, depending on what your players are looking for.
It's nice. I like that. Because I mean, my own games, I tend to pendulum. Like, we'll do a lighthearted one, and then I really like my introducing horror elements into things. So I'll do like a sci-fi horror. We'll do like the Aliens RPG or something like that. We'll go like really dark, and then be like, all right, time to lighten the tone up again. And it's I kind of pendulum. I don't really have one that I stick with personally.
Well, that can happen in long-term campaigns too, right? Like you just had a session that was really dark, so you've got to lighten it up. That's similar to what Monty Cook talks about all the time, where like pacing is the most important part of being a GM, and that's part of it, right? Your beats, are they up or down? You can't have endless down beats. Well, you can if you run like 10 candles, where you are going to die in the end, but.
Yeah, Luna was telling me a lot about 10 Candles, and I hadn't really heard much about it before, but I'm like, this sounds pretty cool. So I might have to check it out. Definitely have to check it out. Yeah, I think that's a general writing technique is you don't want to mentally exhaust your players with one feeling or mode. It's true with anything, like video games, for example. Like, if you keep slamming them action, players are going to get bored because they don't have time to like mentally rest. Same thing with RPGs. And if you're just playing D&D and it's just nothing but stabbing goblins in the face all day, every day, they may have tons of fun with it in the first few sessions, but eventually they'll be like, I just want to talk to the barmaid.
Right.
That's and switch it up a little bit. So you got back into RPGs. Pretty hardcore by the sounds of it. You're delving back into it. How did you get around to starting Shadomain.com? How did this start up?
Well, I should say that Shadomain has been around as long as I've been playing. It was the name of the first world I wrote, probably 1982. My first world was named Shadomain. I just thought it was cool. Almost every world I've made up since then has been named Shadomain. So at one point, early on in my 5e stealth, I've been on and off. I've been a web designer since, I don't know, a long time, 25 plus years.
As long as there's been web.
Yeah, almost. Me and Tim, we made the web up one night. But So one time I bought the domain name just to make sure nobody else could use the name because I'd been using it forever and I thought it was cool and I should own it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long it sat there before I did anything. And then one time, after, like you said, I was very serious, not serious, but very into this when I dove back into 5e. So I would like watch all the D&D talking head videos and listen to podcasts and stuff like that. So I was constantly trying to like be a better GM and find out how the game works and pacing and writing and all this kind of thing. So after a while, I was just like, well, I own this domain. I guess I could like write about some of the stuff that I'm interested in, some of the things I learned. And I started it, but like I don't think anybody knew it existed. It just sat there as a place for me to put my thoughts for a while. Well, until very recently, actually. Then this summer, it was like, well, wait a minute, we could do more. So I was talking to Gamer Mom Luna, and I was like, well, what if we did this? We'll just completely relaunch it. And because we had already written some articles, and it's like, there's some good ideas here, but maybe, it's more than just us, right? So we reached out, we were like, oh, let's do interviews. We're scheduled into, I don't know, sometime in the winter at this point with interviews because we've got so many. And then it's like, well, I've learned so much from other people. Let's just stop and point out like things that everybody else should know or experience, like videos and podcasts and blogs and stuff. So there was just more content than we could deal with. So yeah, right now we've been running a new post Monday through Friday every week, and that's scheduled for months. So
yeah, I saw you had a pretty strict schedule and like things you were putting out on each day is like a different thing.
Yeah, so there's a new article every Monday, and Tuesday and Thursday is lighter. It's where we highlight somebody else. So like a really cool video for GMs, and then Thursday might be a really cool video for players or a blog post, just highlighting other people that you need to pay attention. You should pay attention to if you want to learn more.
Yeah.
And then Wednesdays when we have our Wednesdays when we get an interview, and the interview is not video. It's just 5 or 6 questions. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty simple. If anybody out there wants to,
super simple. I did it. They got one of me on there. I actually don't.
So simple.
The funny part is I don't remember doing it. I kind of do, but I kind of don't. And then you posted it, and then it eventually posted on your site. I'm like, I guess I did do one.
Well, right. And there's the cool thing about the interviews is you can make as much or as little as you want. We don't have any requirements. We're not printing it, so it doesn't matter how long it is. So we've had people go on and on for what would be pages. Mm-hmm. Or we've had people answer in 1 or 2 sentences, and it's all fine. We just want to get other perspectives out there. And then Friday is sort of free form. Right now it's some kind of campaign diary. So usually like talking about a game that we've played or a game that I've run or something like that, like an experience.
Which can be its own type of experience for other people to take on. Like absorbing an entire like live play of a session can be a little bit much, especially in people's busy lives.
Oh, yes.
Where if it's just like a summarized campaign diary and your thoughts on how it went and maybe like how you could improve or what you did right or things like that, I think it's a little more digestible sometimes for a lot of people. So I actually sometimes quite like those campaign diaries. I think they're pretty good.
Yeah. That's usually pretty short too, because of what you just said. I don't need to go point by point. It's more these are the interesting things that happened. Last night I have a regular weekly 5e group that's using the Monty Cook Tolis campaign setting.
Oh yeah.
But because it was Halloween, I took Monty Cook's Darkest House, which is sort of a system and adventure all put together, and crunched it down so it would fit in one session. And I did that as a one-shot in the middle of my Tolis campaign. So I'll be writing about that, like maybe somebody out there has never seen The Darkest House or heard about Tolis, and just here's my experience. And Also, I need to hear from other people that have done similar things and figure out how I could have done it better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Tolis. I'm obviously quite familiar with. Darkest House, I'm not as familiar with. I know of it, and I haven't really looked into it or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tolis is, I think, is kind of neat. And the fact that there's both like Cypher and 5e like versions of it. For anyone that's interested, it's almost maybe a good way if you really wanted to try Cypher, is you could start in 5e and then sort of like kind of delve into the same setting in Cypher if you want to dip your toes into a different system. Just something to think about.
And right, and there's more of that out there. Like the latest Plane Breaker that came out over the summer. It came out in 5e over the summer and is out in Cypher for January. So
yeah, we're seeing a lot of these cross-system ideas. Like even the book I'm working on right now, the like codifying the dungeon slug stuff. It's got rules for Pathfinder 2nd edition, D&D 5th edition, and Cypher in it, as well as some like system agnostic ideas and how to run it in anything. And I think we're seeing more of that. There are still people that are still diehard, like, this is the only system that matters. But I think most people are starting to finally start to see that, okay, maybe the systems are just different tools that we could use for different times. Hopefully.
Yeah, the next adventure I'm working on, I'm going to publish it genre independent. So, but then you'll have a free downloadable PDF depending on what system you're running it in. So it'll just say, you encounter blah, blah, blah. And then you look in your PDF, and if you're 5e, it stats out the blah, blah, blah. And if you're Cypher, it stats out the blah, blah, blah. So
that's what I want to see more of, 1000%. Because there are times that I don't know what system I want to run. But I might have an idea anyways, or there might be a cool adventure I want to try. Or an adventure will come out, but it's not for the system I want to run it in. I would love to see more people write adventures like that, where it's like, here's the story independent of the mechanics. I think that's a great way.
It's when you start writing that way, you realize, wait a minute, what did I get myself into? Because it's obvious you need to stat the other NPCs and monsters that way, right? But wait a minute, what's a perception check in each of these games? So you do have, it's a little more work than you think, but it's actually really fun to do it that way.
Yeah, even in the one I'm doing right now, I've had to change some of the things in the way I wanted to do them, because I realized that they will work quite well in 2 out of the 3 systems I'm currently statting it for. And then that third one's like, no, I do it different, son. Okay. I guess I got to change this up a little bit.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I like it. Wow, time is slipping by on this so far. We're already at 37 minutes. I dare say we're having a good chit chat. I like this. So tell you what, why don't we get into some questions, mull over them, and see if we can sort of answer them, see if our experiences give us similar answers or not. Find 90% of the time the answer is just talk to the damn player like they're an adult, but let's see what kind of questions we can get here. Let's roll randomly out of the community list that I have. Get my little Christmas tree. Get a little Christmas tree die here. Roll. 67. Turtle1779 asks, what is it?
It's the best turtle, by the way.
The best turtle.
1779 was a good year for turtles.
I like turtles. About to run a game with a trans or non-binary person. How do I make the game inclusive to them?
All right. Well, I'll assume we're talking about a trans non-binary player, but we could be talking about a character.
Oh, they say person, so I'm assuming the player. They don't really give details on it or like anything like that. I'm assuming they're talking about the player. They're probably just trying to make sure the player's comfortable.
Right. So I think we're gonna have to fall back on your default advice, right? Talk to your players.
Yeah.
I would probably have a one-on-one before and ask that player what their concerns were. Because we've got the generic, right? You want to have the session 0 and you want to go over lines and veils.
Yeah, always.
Nothing is off the table. You can, well, okay. The other thing about lines and veils is it's important to say no one is allowed to ask why. If I say I don't want this in my game, we're not going to put it in the game. You don't get to ask why, what's wrong with that.
That could call someone out, and that's not cool. That's why I do mine like the X card factors and lines and veils and everything. It's like a Google poll that's anonymous. I don't even know which one of the players gave me the answers, which is because I don't want to. I don't want them called out on it.
Another thing you can do, I don't know if this is directly related to the question, but it could be. If you've got a group where you're afraid that the other players are not going to be, not that they're not going to be open, but say you have a session 0 and you say, okay, what are things that are, out of bounds here? If you can break the ice, that will help. Like, here are some things, like, this is something that's out of bounds for me. And you could say this as a GM, just to sort of get the ball rolling, right? And because sometimes if you just say that, you might have a group of players that are all afraid to be the first one to speak up.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. And yeah, I think your advice of just like talk to them personally ahead of time is probably one of the best things you can do. In the end, I think also one of the most important bits is it was kind of what I was saying earlier. Like, I don't care who or what you are at the table as long as you're not hurting anybody, because you're pretending to be someone else anyways. We're playing grown-up make-believe. So,
right.
I mean, at my table, I don't... as long as you mesh with the group, like, you're not butting heads with people, which has nothing to do about who or what you are necessarily, then once again, I've been kind of lucky. I have very open and accepting groups, but it can also be important to shop around to make sure that they are compatible with the group, just in case as well.
Sometimes the way you frame the question is really important. Like, sometimes you could have that one-on-one discussion, and if you phrase the question like, what do you want? What do we want to keep out of the game? That could be a harder question to answer. You might want to phrase it as sort of describe a situation that in a game that made you uncomfortable or something like that. Because again, we're getting the ball rolling. Not that you want details, but at that point, you're not asking them to ban something from everybody else. You're getting that information, but in a slightly different way, a question that feels more comfortable.
That's excellent advice. You're basically turning a negative into a positive. Instead of like, what do we need to subtract? You're asking like, what positive interactions can we create in this situation?
Right. And that'll give you, framing it as positive, that'll give you the same information as a GM without asking them to like take something away from other players.
Excellent advice. I think we pulled more out of that answer than I even thought we were going to. Instead of just talk to them, that's really good shit. That was really good.
Really?
Shit.
Do I get a raise now?
You get a gold star, and maybe I'll send you a cookie. I'll make good cookies. All right, let's do another one here. It's like we pretty much agreed on how to handle that one. I haven't disagreed with too many of my guests. There's been a couple, but for the most part, I had pretty good ones on.
Yeah, let's get a question we can fight over.
Yeah, I don't think I have too many. What one did I get here? Where are you? Cool Technician 7976. That's a long name. Player keeps inserting their own lore into the middle of sessions. They keep inserting their own lore without consulting me or even telling me, but I'm the GM, so the world lore should be my job. How do I deal with this? Okay, I think we have answers for this one. Well, I'll let you start and go first if you.
Well, obviously this depends on your GM perspective, because a little earlier I was saying I love this.
Yeah,
this is what I'm asking for, but not everybody is asking for that. It's just the way my game has developed. So I mean, we could fall back and say this is something you want to set up ahead of time. If anybody has any suggestions, please text me offline. But obviously, we're talking about that's already passed. We're already past session 0, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have to fall back on your initial advice. Talk to the player, and it's probably a one-on-one in this case, because you're just asking them. You say, this is really good stuff that you're writing, but if you could, again, phrase it positive, right? If you could run it by me first, so we can make sure it works for both of our ideas, that we're building a better story together, right?
Mm-hmm.
That'll give you the opportunity, because that's what you're trying to avoid, right? You've got 5 people sitting around the table. One of them says, "Oh, but this," and you're like, "No, not here." You don't want to do that in front of the other 3 players. So if the player could bring you ahead of time, that's obviously something you could avoid.
Yeah, I think it is partly setting expectations in your session 0, which, by the way, if all of you out there are not having session 0s and talking to your players before you start the game, I'm sorry, that's the one time I'm going to say you're doing it wrong. It is a good idea, beyond a good idea, to have your session 0. Session 0 isn't just, this is when we make characters. There's a whole lot more, and there's tons of videos out there explaining why it's a whole lot more. You're going to want to look that up.
Right.
But for this, I think it is partly a GM style. Like, for me, like, it's partly out of, I want the players to be involved, but partly out of my own sheer laziness. I want players to, go ahead and make part of the world for me. That's less work for me. I don't have to do that now. But I'm very much used to the yes and the improv. I can deal with it. But I also realize it's not always a mindset that it's like, oh, I just don't like it. Some people just aren't good at the improv or the yes and they need a very strict, like, this is what's in the world. Just make sure you talk to the players. Like, let them know that that's how you want to run things or how you need to run things.
Right. I should say, just quickly, relative to session 0, I think almost all of us now are talking about this is necessary. And it's necessary for lots of different reasons. But I don't want to make it too big a deal, because I've had a session 0 be like a whole session where we do nothing but go over things and maybe character creation. Sometimes session 0 is just like the first half hour of a session.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be, it depends a lot on your group and the game and the system and all that kind of stuff. It
depends how well you know them as well.
Exactly. So I think it's important to have it, but what that is, it can be up to your group.
Yeah. Because, like, I'm just starting a new campaign with my one group, and these are people I've played with for years. Actually, one of the players is someone I started playing with in the 90s, in my first game and whatnot. So, like, I know him well. So yeah, our session 0 for that game was like, just let's make characters. Here's what the world is about. We're done. And that's it. Whereas in the Friendo group, I was running a lot of, like, I wanted to teach people other systems and how RPGs worked. And it was a rotating cast, and I did not know these people at all. So session 0 was a lot more involved.
Yep.
I think you're absolutely right that you got to tailor it to your group. It's like anything. This is as much a job of socialization as it is just playing a game.
Right.
That's why it's not just a board game, among other things. Yeah, we got time. Let's get a third one going on in here. What do we got? 32. I don't know how to pronounce this one. Svitz? S-Fitz 08? I don't know. S-Fitz 08. And if you see this, I'm sorry if I butchered your name. My players are very bad at investigating plot hooks that I've thrown at them, especially with items that they find. If I give them a physical clue in the game, they just throw it in the bag of holding and then don't investigate it further. How do I fix this?
All right, so there's two things going on here, potentially. If the problem is literally that physical clues are the problem, then yeah, the answer is, they're not interested in physical items, then you do something else, right? Instead of giving them a written scroll that tells them a clue, a ghost shows up over and over again and keeps giving them clues. So it's not a physical item, but there can be a time, and this has happened to me in my recent campaign, that you're saying they're not picking up on your plot hooks, but is that because there's a legitimate concern here that just they're not crazy about your plot hooks? You think it's the most brilliant idea in the world. They just don't like it, right? So sometimes them not picking up on your plot hook is like a way for them to say that's not what we want out of our story. Mm-hmm. And it might mean that you need different things. I ran into this in my Tolas campaign because I wasn't sure what they wanted. The previous campaign was very much a build up to same players, right? In my own Shadomain world, they had built very combat heavy characters, built up to the final kill the bad guy. He's like an evil demigod and big fight, and that was it. But in the Tolas campaign, they had built different characters that weren't necessarily combat focused. So I had to throw out a bunch of things. And one thing I threw out to them was like a variation on the deck of many things called the deck of luck. And they that was literally what it was a plot device. Like every time they draw, something happens to them. Not deck of many things, you get 50,000 gold pieces, but more like you get a quest. They never opened it. I don't know. When did I do that? 6 months ago. They have yet to draw a card. So they just weren't that interested. So they were telling me what they were interested in, and that wasn't it. So what I eventually, and I was also having I'm having the same issue as I go along. I have to tailor back combat because this group just isn't as strong in combat. After a while, it occurs to me, they're telling me what they want. They created these characters, right? Mm-hmm. So they don't want the same campaign as last time because they have not non-combatant characters, but, not maxed out super paladins, ultra barbarians. So they're telling me what kind of story they want. So I then tailored my plot hooks to those kind of things. So now instead of an epic battle where they're going to defeat the evil demigod, they're going to end up like in a political kind of stage where they're going to be leaders of other NPCs who maybe will do the fighting for them. And they've latched onto it because that's what they were in, unconsciously, right? Unconsciously telling me what they wanted by not picking up the previous plot hooks. It's probably not the answer you're looking for because that's really hard. It's a lot of work for us, but
I think it's the right answer. It's kind of same along the same veins. I was going to be that people have different play styles, especially with so many newer players coming into the game right now. And I mean, this is a generalization, but most newer players, when they get into the game and all they've experienced of RPGs at this point is like video games, they want to go in and they want to punch things in the face. The vast majority of the time. So maybe they're not picking up on the more subtle plot hooks. Everyone plays differently, and you never know. Like, I look at my old 2nd edition days, one of my favorite campaign settings was Birthright. I loved the sandbox, the micromanagement, the social intrigue, like court politics. It was really fun to me. That is a niche thing. Not a lot of people want to have to do their kingdom's taxes in a role-playing game. So a lot of people just want to see the dungeon door and the goblins behind it and go stab them in the face. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have run plenty of games, especially for newer players, where, there's a lot more of that. And as you said, their characters are going to tell you what they want.
Yeah.
You're probably giving them this stuff and they're putting it away because that doesn't seem fun to them. A lot of people talk about the 3 pillars of play, although I think there's kind of more, but the combat, the exploration, and the social. It sounds like you're really giving them that exploration pillar and they're just not having it. That is not the pillar that they want. And I made a video at one point about how, like, think of your campaign as a house built upon these pillars and the expectations the players have of these pillars. If they're off, the house is going to fall down.
Right.
Because you don't have your foundation. You gotta figure out where the players' expectations are, and then fill it appropriately on what you want those pillars to be.
Yeah. So maybe you wanna come up with 3 or 4 more different plot hooks, but make sure they're completely different, right?
Yeah.
So they find the entrance to a lost super mega dungeon, or they find a map to, exploration in the jungle, like a lost kingdom, something like that. And basically if you have a plot hook where they know there's going to be a lot of combat and hoarding treasure versus we're finding out secrets about the kingdom or something like that. Just make them completely different and see what they bite on. They'll tell you what they want.
One thing
I should say, don't ask them. If you ask your players what kind of campaign, they will. Some of them will, but most of them will not know. They know, but they won't be able to tell you.
I 100% agree with that. The amount of times my players has said, "Oh, we'd like this really open sandboxy game," and then they don't. They really don't.
Yep.
they want it to be a lot more guided than that. And I'm like, oh God, why did I make this sandbox? It's and one of the things I also suggest when I'm designing, because I don't tend to run pre-written stuff as much. I'm just not good at it. It's not my thing. I like to go free form, do my own thing. But one of the things I do when I'm designing stuff is make everything modular. I may have a point I want the players to run across. It doesn't matter when they do it. It doesn't matter where they do it. If the goblin village I want them to encounter, it could be in the mountains, it could be in the forest, it could be tomorrow, it could be a week from now. The players don't have to know it's modular and I've changed it. You don't want them to see behind the curtain. But you don't have to have everything like very, very planned out. Like it is here, it is now. This plot hook leads to this and only this.
Right. Most of the time when I have plot hooks out there, I have maybe 2 sentences written. And I don't know where it's going, but I know I'll figure out where it's going if they go that way, right? You've got to have faith that, all the stuff that you just wrote and they didn't use, you'll be able to write stuff for wherever they do want to go.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think this has been a really good conversation. This was a very fast hour. That went by. My gosh.
Yeah.
So that was a really good conversation. Thank you for coming out on the QEDTalks. Before we go, is there any current projects or anything you want to plug? Anything you're working on right now that seems pretty keen?
Let's see. So, Shadomain.com we talked about. That's ongoing.
Yes.
I'll be at PAX Unplugged this year. If anybody's out there wants to, meet, play games or anything, you can reach out to me on Twitter is the best way to find me usually. Although Shadomain.com you'll find all my contacts and such. And I guess I'll have to say this publicly now. I'm working on a Christmas-based one-shot. It's a little whether I can get it done and out there by Christmas, we'll see. But now that I said it live, I have to do it, right? So that'll be good.
Well, we'll see. The planning never goes so well. I've done similar stuff before, and I'm like, all right, I guess it's Christmas in July. Let's go.
Yeah.
But I wish you all the luck on that. So check out Shadomain.com, as he'll and Luna will probably get into a lot more details about all that stuff. And I'm not just plugging it because he's the guest. Like, it actually, there's a lot of really cool stuff on the site. So you want to check it out.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you for being on QEDTalks. Another good one, as always. And I think that's all we have for today. So as always, stay healthy, stay safe, and have a good one, eh?